stuff together so that we can look at how application development is speeded up by various tools that are available in the marketplace, open source tools or otherwise. But so some today application development goes on in many different ways. So first, let me share my screen and then let's go through. Okay, where am I? Here am I? And so the first thing, one of the first things that I wanted to do was actually get this concept of having an API and then working an application starting from the API. So apart from all the stuff we are doing, like deciding upon a product and then finding that this is the product that we want to develop, this has got marketing and you got some backing from somebody who steps in and says, okay, I'll support your project and all that, then you need to start. You're going to start writing code, but before you start writing code, you must have a very good idea of what you actually is going to be the design of your application. Okay, it doesn't. It's there's no language or any other thing that we are talking about. We're talking about what are the functions that the application is going to provide. And for that, you actually need to start thinking about what are the um, from the end user perspective, what is the end user going to actually request from the application? Most applications are, that's the way it works, because an application exists for the user to use, and the user needs to um, send a request to the application, like list me all the products that you have for a commercial website or a website, retail website. List all the products that you have, or list products of type women's dresses, something like that. And then um, so there are multiple ways in which, or multiple requests that the end user will make to the application, and each of these requests must be met by the application. Today, modern application development takes place in, you have a front end, then you have, because it's mostly internet based and cloud based, and there are a lot of security issues. So you want to keep the front end separate from the back end. The backend contains your application code as well as the database supporting your application code, and that you want more protected. And so you would have some sort of firewall between the front end and the back end. The request from the user will hit the front end, and the request will pass through the firewall after authentication and verification that there is no malicious code in it. It will pass to the backend. The backend will do its job and then return whatever uh, data it has to return. The request requires some data to be returned. That data will be returned back to the through the firewall to the front end, and finally rendered on the browser window of the end user. So the backend um, response, there is a very clear contract between the front end and the back end. So the contract is what is called an application programming interface, or an API. So if a user makes get me all objects of this type request, then the contract is that from the UI to the backend is, if such a request comes in, You must go into the database, look at all the objects that are there and filter them by type that is requested, and then render it on the screen. If no object of this type exists, you have to saying no object found, and you have to display zero objects found. If the request itself is malformed, you have to reject the request. So this is the contract that the API between the front end and the back end. This contract is implemented by the API. Okay, so let's look at in such case. I mean, since this is a contract, there must exist a format in which the contract is written, and in which is understood both by the front end developer and the back end developer, and that is what is called a specification. You have a contract specification for an application programming interface. I will just call it an API from this point onwards. And so the everybody has a very clear understanding of what this application is going to provide in terms of what can the front end request and what can the will the back end respond with. So the product owner, developer, QA team, DevOps team, operations team, everybody is aware of this. And if anything goes wrong with the application, everybody is aware at which part of it is failing, at least a very rough idea of which part is failing, and then they can go ahead with and find out if the request itself was bad, the UI was doing good, but the backend was doing bad, and so on. So, um, writing an API specification as well as understanding what the API specification is to do requires a lot of knowledge in various areas. Firstly, the API specification implements what is called REST. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. In the before REST was a protocol that people started using for interaction between front end and back end. What we had was called WSDL, or Web Services Description Language, WSDL. The problem with WSDL was that it was heavy duty. The specification was really onerous, and you had to be very I mean, specifications are always that way, but this specification was really heavy. A lot of effort needed to be made to make a specification. That's number one. Number two, since it is a web service, you need a way of registering the service. So you needed a broker where the service provider will register themselves, the service consumer will also register themselves, and then you have to the service consumer has to actually search the directory for the service that he needs, and then you establish contact with the service, and then you have to adhere to the specification to make whatever requests you need to make. That was discarded because REST was a much more simpler protocol. You didn't need an intermediate broker. The REST request response was implemented directly in the backend, and that's why REST took off. The specification that there's a language to specify an API is written in either YAML or in JSON. Both are available. YAML is yet another markup language. Again, it has very specific syntax requirements. Uh, of course, there are helpers that you stuff YAML into a parser and a linter, and it will tell you where all you made mistakes or where all it doesn't adhere to the YAML specification, and it will throw it out. And you can correct it. And JSON is JavaScript object notation. It's another markup language. uh, of course, the development, whoever is developing the front end and the back end, they must know their stuff. They must know the language they're developing in. Front end, it could be Angular, could be React, Django framework, whatever. And the back end people also need to know what they're doing. Apart from all of this, you also have data persistence, because the API at the end of the day will be looking at how to serve up the data that is requested by the end user. And what is the data persistence we are using? Are we using a relational database, an object database, a blob? What are we using, and how is the data retrieved, and how is the data presented to the end user? So there is a bunch of knowledge. Everybody needs not know be an expert in every area, but if you're in the development team that is using APIs, you must understand not only APIs, also have some level of understanding of each of these components. So what does an API implement? It implements the RESTful services methods, and these are all HTTP methods. So you have a post method, post, get, put, patch, delete. So this slide tells you in short what all happens when you do a post request. A post will create a new item or record, and you can um, do a bulk creation. So if you create an entire collection, it can be done, and you the API should implement some sort of method for bulk creation of objects. And the return code will be 201 in this case. Uh, if you are creating one particular specific ID, that's going to be a problem, because by ID you are probably not going to be able to create a user, because the ID is in most cases automatically generated. You create a user and the user is given an ID by the system, not by you. So you would generally get a 404 or a 409. 404 would be, such a user with such an ID is not found because they're not there, or you cannot create a conflict because the user with the same ID that you're trying to create new is already existing. Now get is fairly simple. It's a read operation. You can get a whole list, you can get a collection, or you can get a specific item. If a specific item ID is wrong, you will get a 404 not found. If it's right, you'll get a 200 OK. Put between post and put will update or replace an existing record. And the put you cannot use with an entire collection. You will generally, most APIs will not allow a put or a replace for an entire collection. If you want to really replace an entire collection, this must be done by um, working with a data store directly. If it's a object data store, you must work through its commands. And if it's a relational database, you must work with SQL to get that done. Generally, RESTful services will not allow you to do a put of an entire collection. Specific item, if you want to do a put, it will update and return a 200 0, or it will say 204 not found, or 404 not found, or 204 not no contents, which means that some field you are trying to insert is missing. It is mandatory field. Patch is update and modify. So you want to update a particular field within a particular record, that can be done. Again, entire collection is not allowed. Delete also, entire collection is generally not allowed. There may be very specific cases where an API may allow a particular super user to do an entire collection delete. And that's about the sets of operations that one would implement through an API. So what do we have as a toolbox to do this, to basically create an API? So you got these open source tools called Swagger. And you got a Swagger editor, you got a Swagger UI, and you got Swagger Code Gen. We look at the editor and the UI, and the Swagger Code Gen is a command line tool. We may have time to do it this week or sometime later. I haven't got it ready yet, in the sense that I'm not prepared to actually demonstrate that. And you got Swagger Hub, Swagger Inspector. These Swagger Inspector is definitely a paid for tool. Swagger Hub, you have both a free version as well as a paid for version. Free version is for a single user, paid version will be for a whole team to use in a collaborative fashion. Okay, what do we have here? Yeah. So how is an API specification written? It is written in what is adhering to something called the Open API specification. Open API specification is abbreviated as OAS. So it defines a standard um interface description for REST APIs. It's got nothing to do with any programming language. It doesn't do anything, have anything to do with any programming language. It is just a YAML file describing your API. And if you are going to use OS tools and Swagger tools to create your API, you must understand very much what is the spec, what is this spec saying. It's all open. This is the whole thing is open source actually. So and the specification helps the whole team understand the what is being contracted between the front and the back end. And because it is specification and it is because it is meant for both humans and computers to consume, so it is a little rigid in the sense that what is required in it must be there. And that's mainly because an API can be used by humans, can be used also by computers. So, in the sense that if you want to automate something, you can do it using the API. Um, and we already saw this get, post, put, patch, delete commands. And the interface specification actually defines exactly what the client will send and what the backend will send back to the client. So that is what the spec is all about. Do I have any more things to say here? Okay, I have one more slide. So this would be a snippet of an open API specification. It starts with I am Open APIs version 3, uh, and my application or my title is Simple Artist version 1, and this a description that says Simple API to illustrate certain concepts. Sorry. Server, this server's stanza or section is optional. You may have it, you may not have it. It's fine. Paths must definitely be there. Paths is okay. If this is my URL, one of my paths will be /artists. And when I hit this URL and put a slash and artist behind it, this is what, and I hit enter, this is a get request and tells me, gives me a description of what this get should do. It should return a list of artists and what is, it gives certain other descriptions and so on. This is not a full snippet, it's just a snippet, it's not a full file. The full file is this would be an example of a full file that so it could also describe what is the authentication scheme that you're using. It could and we already saw the artists. when you you're an artist, you must. This describes how it must be paginated, limits the number of items on a page, and then uh, the page number of the artist to be displayed, and so on. So, and response code will be 200, and what will be returned will be a schema of type array. So since you're having more than one item returned, it has to be an array, and the array has to have items, and the items are of type object, and the object has these properties. It has a required property of username, and then there are other properties that say artist name of type string, artist genre of type string, albums recorded of type integer, how many albums this artist has recorded, and a username string. And this is also the required the username appears in both places as a required parameter as well as a description of what type of parameter it is. Okay, and you'll return a 400 if the request is invalid. And this describes what happens when the a post request is received, post HTTP request. What you're doing is you're inserting a new artist inside the data store or data collection. So request body is required. You cannot just send an empty request body with a post request, because post means you're giving some details which need to be inserted into the collection, right? So that's why the request body is true, and the content will be a JSON file, and the schema will be the schema of the object body will be like this. You must have username as a required parameter, so you would say username something, albums recorded, you may provide artist genre, you may provide artist name, you may provide, but the artist username must be provided. Okay, so I mean, don't just think of it username as username. It could be some moniker he goes by, like yeah, who's that guy? Uh, what is that? Green Day or something like that. So a post request will may get a 200 response if you have successfully created, and a 400 response if it's an invalid request. Okay. And then there's another path. So we just saw this path. One path from here, uh, the part artists has given you, I mean, you can have a get, you can have a put, sorry, you can have a post. So the next level, the get and post is, again, you come back to this second level. The second level is, second level is, can actually have, you can not only request all artists, you can also request artists by username. And the response is, again, it gives you the description, and this is how the descriptions go. So this is not a complete, all the operations are not described, but at least two operations are here for two parts. For the first part, artists, you got the get and the post. For the artist slash username, you got at least the get response. So this is basically a get, and if it's not available, you'll get a 400. Okay, this is a very simple example of uh, how an API spec will be written. Um, so there is an excellent tutorial on LinkedIn. I don't know if you have access to LinkedIn Learning, and there is a really good tutorial on LinkedIn Learning. Um, okay, let me keep this away. This is there is a very nice. Let me post this in the channel so that I posted the link in the channel. If you have a chance, go through this tutorial. It's really a very good tutorial. I just found it yesterday and I started looking at it. It's an excellent tutorial on how to build an API with Swagger. And what Swagger does is that it gives, okay, very simply, come on. Okay, let's keep it there. Very simple. You have to install. Uh, is the screen visible? Are you able to see the letter? See the text?
Yes, yes, okay.
Yeah.
Uh, Okay, just let me do a couple of things. Let me make this something like 16, and let me get rid of this paragraph marks. Okay, so you have to install Node and Node.js in npm. You can search on the internet. You can find plenty of sites on how to do it. Uh, then you just create a directory called Swagger, and then cd into that. You have to download Swagger editor. It's a zip file, and extract it in the Swagger directory. Also have to download Swagger UI and extract it into the directory. Then still within the Swagger directory, you do an npm install HTTP server. HTTP server here is an npm package, and it gives you basically an HTTP server. And then cd to the Swagger editor that you unzipped here, and then do an npm install. What npm install in this case will do is it will take the Swagger editor. So the Swagger editor has a bunch of dependencies on various npm packages, and so this is the Swagger UI. Let me get the other one. Hold on, please. Okay. So what in the Swagger editor, what the last command I ran was npm install, and what npm install has done is it has taken all these different packages that were required by the editor and installed it. So it's doing a bunch of installations of all the dependencies, and that that gets installed. This takes a little time. It takes about 10 minutes or so. Similarly, inside Swagger UI, you would also do the same npm install, and it would install the dependencies for Swagger UI. Okay, and so those two are done and out of the way. And so we are done with this. And then you go up one level and you will execute HTTP server. So go back to the Swagger directory, execute HTTP server, Swagger editor, so and so, so and so on port 8080, and the Swagger UI on port 8081. Okay. Uh, this should be this way. I forgot the HTTP server there. So I have those in two other windows. I will just bring them up. So this is one of them. So in Swagger UI directory, I did this, and in the Swagger editor directory, I did this. So I have two HTTP servers running on my system. One is serving working on port 8080. The other one is working on port 8081. So if I go to port 8080, I'll send this. I will add this instructions into the slide deck and send it slide deck to Mickey. He will upload it, or I will myself upload it to our repository of slides. So now this is port 8080. So if I browse to port 8080, this is what I see. Okay, and this is the Swagger's very famous application called Pet Store. Basically a pet store which has all these operations in it. You can get all the pets. You can put all the pets. You can post. I mean, you can post a new pet when a new pet comes into the store. You can add it to the database by using a post operation. You have a pet by changing the status of the pet. So you can get pet by particular ID and so on. So it's this is for the order book, the inventory and the order book. So this is a very large specification. It's a very large specification. See, it's got how many lines does it have? So it's a 700 line specification which implements all these. It implements for the pet object, these operations for the store object, for the basically it's the orders object. It gets these for the user. It gets these. These are our and you got different model here. You can look at the pet as a model, and that's the model for the pet. Right. So what it is, name is since it's star, it means it's necessary parameter. You cannot not have a parameter like that. Okay. Now, if you look at the Swagger UI, the UI gives you the way of interacting with what we just saw. So if you have built the API, not interacting with the specification, but interacting with the actual API, if when you have built the API, and so you can actually run a get and you can execute let's say I want all sold pets. I first clear my previous okay, and I want to execute. So when I clear, why am I not able to clear this? That's because it is. Okay. So now if I want to, this is just the bare body, there's nothing there. If I want to find, let's say, pending pets, I hit execute and it tells me these pets are, so you got a bunch of data there, right? Is much more than what was there before. So um, it may not make any sense now what is the data, but basically what you're saying is we are running this query. You can run this query and you will the request URL is this. If you are running through the HTTP, this will be the request URL. You can copy this and put it in request URL and you'll get that. And that will be the, so now all this is fine. What do we do with this? Okay. So basically, if you um, go back here, clear this whole thing out, and then in the, do I still have this in my buffer? No. Okay. So you can start typing up a simple API and let me just find what I copied previously. Somewhere I put it. Put it like, hmm, I didn't save it possibly. I wanted to save it, but I didn't save it anyway. You can start typing here like that. You can say open API colon. Uh, we are working with 3.0.0 spec. If you do a control space, it will tell you what to do. So you definitely have to give some sort of info there, and then uh, uh, can give a title. Um, info. So that title, uh, description, something like. I mean, the spec goes on. You can we can even take the other one that we were looking at. This one like this. You can say Open API 3 info version description. So put that there. Mm, where did it got?
Question.
Yep.
Yeah, this one using the editor is just for documentation purpose, right?
No, no,
You're
no,
not
no. It's not
you
not
act
just
you're actually
you
writing the API here.
you you have this generate server, right? Once you have the specification ready, if you do if you take one of these things and say generate the server,
Mm,
it's going to actually generate client stubs for you.
okay.
Do you understand the concept of stubs?
Not really.
Okay, let's do it. Just take a few minutes. Okay, so let's not take any of these. Yeah, I don't need servers, I don't need this, I just need the paths. Okay, I'm going to take artist path, and I'm just going to take all the way to just one path, uh, 200, 400, and that's it. So let me copy that and let me put it into this. Okay, as soon as this is done, you immediately get here. On the right, you get your, what are the two operations that you're are about to do, right? I mean, you have described already. So, uh, so why does it say default? This is okay. There's probably only one. That's why it says default. Or maybe you have to give the name somewhere. I don't know. Uh, at this point, if you do generate server, so let's say you want to do a Node.js server. Suppose you're working in Node.js, you can do a Node.js server. Suppose you're working in a Go language, you can do a Go language server. You can Java, if you want to be working in Java, any one of these can. I mean, Kotlin is a mobile application, right? It's for Kotlin is for iOS and Android and so on. So I'm going to hit this Node.js server, and you got a zip file there. Let's save that zip file. So you have basically you have everything there. Okay, what I'm going to do is it's in downloads. It's here. So let me cut it from here, put it somewhere where I can point to it. Uh, let's put it in Swagger UI. Good enough. This is where we are working. So let's put it here. Paste it here. Extract 7-zip extract, extract here. So it extracted that way, is it? Okay, never mind. Um, if you go back to our friend Node.js and you open different the folder that we just opened it in, uh, Swagger UI. And so this API controller service, all this has been is the unzip of the zip file. So if you look at API, you will see the YAML file that we printed there. Say simple artist YAML. This is the YAML that we put in there. That's already there. Let's close this. And then you got the controllers. So you got a default JS there. It says so the get and post functions are already there, built in for you. Of course, you have to write the back end portion of it, because the connection to the database, the connect and but the basic um, the basic JavaScript is already there for you. So it tells you, I mean, what do you do when you get an artist.get, then you do this, you write the JSON, you get, so all this is already there. You have to, of course, insert the code that does the database call and fetches the data, and then converts it into a JSON, and then you can write JSON, right?
Okay.
So, but this server stub is already created for you.
Okay. Okay.
So
So
that,
let me just. Okay. Go on.
so similarly, the service also is generated. So there's an actual server running here, right? So it's uh, s- a lot of the I wouldn't say a lot of the work. At least a stubs are created for you in whichever language you want to work in. So when you go here and when we look at generate server, it gives you a bunch of things that you would like to, languages in which you can this. There are um, uh, so there's a Python Flask also here if you want to use Python. If you want ASP.NET, Scala. Wow, that's you. Spring is a Java. Java is so if you want to use Spring and Spring Boot framework, you can use that. And so at least it's a start, right? And everybody on the team, once they have the spec, they can install their own stubs, and they can start testing out their stubs. Okay, you don't have to do every one of them all at the same time. So what you would do is, I would say, okay, I'm going to this one developer may take this one and say, okay, artist get and artist post I will implement. Okay, there may be another object that you're looking at here. You can in this YAML file, you suppose you had in this YAML file, apart from artists, you had albums, let's say. You also had a list of albums. So that album part of it also will have stubs here in the control section. You, this is default. You'll have it could be called artist.js. The other one could be called albums.js, and then you would hand off the albums.js to somebody else, developer number two. Now he has to implement the albums. And in the database, artists are in a separate, either in a separate database itself. That's the ideal way to do it in microservices architecture, or you could have one table dedicated to artists and another table dedicated to albums. And the artists and album, they will have different data, different tables, different database structure. And the developer one need not worry about what developer two is doing, and developer two does not need to worry about what developer one is doing. They have the specification. As long as he writes to the specification, and he can test his code to the specification for the component he's working on, everything is good. That's the whole purpose of using a specification and a code generator, to get to the point at least of having a common spec and having some stubs to work from. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yes, I think this is really good. So what I'm trying to think, okay, I write my backend API, say in Spring Boot, for example, using microservices architecture,
Mm.
and I wrote my different APIs using the services and the controller class. I've done that. So I just need to come to Swagger editor and write all those specifications so that the front end can call it, right?
Yeah, you can even not have a front end at all.
Okay.
You could use Postman or something, like, you could use Postman if you like.
Okay.
So you could see, uh, come on, yeah, you could set up a collection in Postman, and you could do a post and a get and all of that in Postman, right?
Okay.
You could do a post or a get from there. So you don't need to actually because the front end is getting developed. It's got its own front end. It's got its own problems, right? The design will go through multiple phases. You have to have multiple language support. It's got its own life cycle.
Yeah.
So, but you can start testing the application without the front end
Okay.
because the back end is built. You know the specification. You can take the specification and actually put it into Postman and have all the functions there and run it from there. Or you could even use the Swagger UI to run it. So any such tool like Postman or Insomnia or REST UI, there are so many. So any one of those clients can actually post and get to the back end without the UI still being ready.
Cool.
So that's rapid development and distributed development. So the different developers are working on different things without interfering with each other, and that is and you said something that I want to reverse. You said you have your controller class and all that built. No, you should start with the Swagger UI. I mean, you should start with an API spec.
Okay.
At least a rough idea of what functions we want to implement. Like if I take think of Testoper and I want to write an application that connects job seekers and and candidate seekers. So how do I write that application? So you define the functions first. Let's have a members directory, and then members, you must be able to get all members. You must be able to get member by type, like job seeker, job poster, job giver, maybe a learner, a volunteer. There are different types of members, so you can have members, member types, and then you can have, like, let's say, courses. What are the courses available? Then the job posters are going to post available positions. So you could have a positions object which has its own get put and all that, and then there are associations between who posted that position and how to get back to the. I mean, it's complex. Okay, so those things must be ironed out, but at least you have the major objects that the application has to deal with, and you have an API spec for each one of those objects, and you could generate the stubs, and then each different developers can start working on different parts of the code,
Okay.
different components, and each component is sort of independent. It will be in its own Docker container, and how they talk to each other and how they come together is a later. I mean, again, somebody who has the skills has to sit down and architect that. But the code can be you can start building on not on day one, maybe not on day two, maybe, but once the spec is ready, you can start building the code.
So the spec is the entire thing that we want to do. We start with that before even going to build the code.
Yes, it is a recommended practice.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You start with at least define the functions on paper, and then write an API spec in the Open API format, and then use Swagger and generate. I mean, this whole thing can be run on your laptop, right? We are running this on my laptop.
Yeah.
Even though they say we are using a browser and going to one, but we are navigating only to 127, which is my laptop.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the just wanted to make this team aware of these are the things that we can do, right?
Cool.
And modern application development, this is how an organization would like to do things. And this is self-documenting in the sense that this is the document that you will this is the document that you will actually provide to the end user, saying this is my document, and if you want to say how the get is done, this is how the get is done. And so if you want to try it out, this is what you will do, and and so on. So even complex objects like, I showed you Postman here. So so the first in this particular thing, the first thing would be I have to get a bearer token, right? So the uh, once I get a bearer token, then I can do other things like um, okay, let's do this. I mean, I can't do this. This is not connected anywhere. But now this is only a get. So the body, there will be nothing in the body. But if you want a post here, this document gives you what the body should be, right? It tells you if you want to create a new whatever object this is what you have to provide. You have to provide a JSON, a JSON object or a JSON file which contains all these things. Okay, you should, and only then you can create a connection. This is a particular example of how to create a connection for a particular. So there is let's find. Hold on. IBM Cloud, IBM Cloud template. Okay. Okay, this is how you would create a connection to a Huawei cloud. Okay, this is more understandable for people. So if you look at the body of this, oh, there is no body to it. Okay. Uh, yeah. So any post will have a body. Okay, it will tell you like this post we saw. When you do an artist, you want to post something. That's the body. The request body should have these things in a JSON format or a YAML format, mostly JSON because rest is works as JSON. So you have to have these items in your body, and only then the post will work. What are the mandatory parts? The required one is mandatory. Everything else is optional. So it's something similar to what we saw in the Postman thing. Uh, Create IBM Cloud. This is the only one that has an actual body in it. So there are certain parameter for connection parameters. You require uh, the cloud username, and you require the API key. So and you need the provider ID. So these three items are mandatory in this. Okay, so that's and this will come from a Swagger specification, something like this one, the this one. This gives you the body of the post. So let's look at the post. So this gives you what is the body. This is the example of a body when that you would use with a post. So you must have artists. These are the things, and it'll. Yeah, I don't know why it's not telling you what is the mandatory this, but it should tell you which parameter is username string is the one that we said is okay. So well, that's all that I had to show today. I didn't expect it to go this long even, but still it was useful, and it was, I mean, it was useful for me also. I refreshed quite a lot of my own understanding of this. It's a long time since I worked with the Swagger UI.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Path. I would really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Great.
Okay, the hands-on session is over now. I'll stop sharing my screen. I will keep on. Mickey wanted to speak about something.
Yeah. Yep. Let me just stop the recording. Just give me a second.